You're kneeling in a field of wild grass. It's roughly 23,000 years ago on the shore of a lake in what is now northern Israel. The seeds in front of you are hard, bitter and papery. Bite into one raw and you'll crack a tooth before you taste anything. There is no obvious reason to look at this plant and think, food. And yet you've been grinding these seeds for the last 2 hours, because everyone in your camp already knows something. Modern textbooks got backwards for decades. Bread did not wait for farming. Farming may have waited for bread. Here's the story most of us were taught. Humans settled down, planted crops, and only then figured out how to turn grain into bread. Farming first, bread second. It's a tidy story. It's also, according to the last 15 years of archaeological evidence, likely the wrong order entirely. In 2018, archaeobotanist Amaia Arranz-Otaegui, then at the University of Copenhagen, published findings from a site called Shubayqa I, a Natufian hunter-gatherer camp in the Black Desert of Jordan. Inside 2 ancient stone fireplaces, her team recovered 24 tiny charred fragments. Under a microscope, they turned out to be flatbread, baked from wild corn, barley, and the ground tubers of an aquatic plant called clubrush. The date on that bread? Roughly 14,400 years old. That's about 4,000 years before anyone on Earth is known to have deliberately planted a crop. These weren't farmers. They had no fields, no silos, no permanent villages, and they were still harvesting wild grain, dehusking it by hand, grinding it into flour, mixing it with water, and baking it in the ashes of a fire. A process with at least 5 separate steps, each requiring specific knowledge passed down and practiced. That's not an accident. That's a recipe. And Shubayqa I isn't even the earliest evidence. At Ohalo II, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, archaeologist Ehud Weiss at Bar-Ilan University found a flat grinding stone coated in starch residue from wild wheat, barley, and oats, dated to around 23,000 years ago. Whether that grain became bread, porridge, or paste is still debated among researchers, but the key step was already there. Turning an inedible seed into something a human body could actually digest. Here's why that step mattered so much. Raw grain is nearly useless to us. The starch inside a wild seed is locked in a dense crystalline structure that our gut struggles to break down. Eat it raw, and you get almost nothing out of it. You might as well be chewing wood. But grind that seed into flour and apply heat, and the starch unfolds. It gelatinizes. Suddenly, the calories that were always inside that seed become available to the human body. This mattered because of something most people never think about. Compared to other great apes, humans have a relatively small gut. Over the course of our evolution, we effectively traded digestive capacity for brain size. A rough deal if your diet is raw plants, since those take a long time to digest for a limited energy return. Grinding and cooking grain was, in effect, a workaround. It let early humans unlock energy their bodies could never have reached on their own. This wasn't a one-off discovery either. At Grotta Paglici in southern Italy, researchers uncovered a stone grinding tool in a layer dated to roughly 32,000 years ago, containing starch from wild oats that had been heated before grinding. Similar tools from the same period have shown up as far apart as Russia and the Czech Republic. Long before the last ice age ended, small pockets of humans across Europe were independently arriving at the same idea. Crack it, grind it, cook it. Then there's Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a massive ritual complex built by hunter-gatherers around 9,500 BC, thousands of years before farming existed in that region. Excavations led by archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered evidence of large-scale grain processing at the site, likely to feed the crowds gathering there for communal events. One theory, still debated but increasingly taken seriously, is that the demand for enough grain to make bread, and possibly beer, for these gatherings is part of what pushed people toward deliberately planting seeds in the first place, not the other way around. Now it's worth being careful here. Historians don't all agree on how much weight to put on Göbekli Tepe's role in triggering agriculture. Correlation at one site isn't proof of causation everywhere. What is well established, though, is the wider pattern. Bread-making know-how existed for thousands of years among people who never farmed a single field. And the pressure to produce more of it lines up chronologically with the earliest deliberate planting in the Fertile Crescent, in places like the Krakadar Mountains, where wild corn was domesticated sometime around 8,500 to 8,000 BC. None of this came for free either. Grinding grain by hand on a stone quern is exhausting, repetitive work. Skeletal remains from early agricultural communities, for instance at Abu Huraira in Syria, show severe wear in the joints of people who spent hours kneeling and grinding. Arthritis in the toes, damage in the lower spine, arm bones remodelled from repetitive motion. That labour fell disproportionately on women in these societies. Every loaf of ancient bread carried a physical cost that doesn't show up in the archaeological record until you look at the bones themselves. So maybe the real story isn't that farming gave us bread. Maybe it's that the hunger for bread, the sheer amount of effort humans were already willing to put in for it, tens of thousands of years before agriculture existed, is part of what pushed us toward farming at all. One of the most consequential shifts in human history, the one that eventually led to cities, writing, and everything after, might trace back to hunter-gatherers who simply didn't want to stop eating something they'd already learned to love.